Chapter 5 of the book 3 Religious Rebels. This chapter is entitled Life's Only Mistake. More than one among the elders of the community secretly resented the appointment of this 27-year-old boy to the priorship of the abbey. 6 months had not elapsed, however, before even these few were congratulating Dom Bernard on his excellent choice. A new Robert had been revealed to them. The same energy was there and the same enthusiasm, but closer contact with him showed most what they had never seen before: a crystal clear sincerity and a simplicity that was transparent. All appreciated his kindness, but the more deeply discerning admired his majestic calm and marveled at his control. But not even Morris knew the price the young prior was paying for his mastery. With each new dawn, he had to take his heart into his own hard hands and say, "Obey." It was the only way he could crush down the surge of his soul for a more literal observance of the rule. Toward the end of his 3rd year in office, when Abbot Bernard talked about the generosity of the community and the grand return they were making to God for all that he had given them, Robert thought an opportune time had arrived for a hint at the possibility of making a greater return through real manual labor. Dom Bernard smiled. "Father Prior," he said with a kindly grin, "you will never make a diplomat. God has given you a soul as open as the air. You are more transparent than stainless glass. No, my son, the suitable time for the introduction of reform has not yet come." Morris found Robert at the window that afternoon with his eyes in a fixed, unseeing stare. When he laughingly accused the prior of idleness, Robert gave a disdainful grunt and said, "It takes a gigantic faith to believe that our whole life is anything else but idleness." "Whew!" whistled Morris. "It seems ages since I heard you use that tone of voice." Then, sagely shaking his head, he added, "But I thought you were up to the heights too long." "Heights," snorted Robert without turning. "It seems to me that I have been in the depths ever since I was made prior." He felt the critical eyes of his friends studying him closely. "See that haze on the hills?" he asked. When Morris gave an aha, and as answer, Robert went on, "Well, I've been living in just such an atmosphere for years. I've been walking through fogs toward hills that ever remain purple on the distant horizon. I plod along, but I never get any nearer my goal. What a life!" "What's wrong, Robert?" Morris put so much sympathy and genuine concern into these 3 words that the prior was won to a full confession. He told his friend of the latest disappointment received from the abbot, then proceeded to lay bare his heart. Morris saw that Robert needed an outlet, so he wisely determined to let him talk. And Robert did talk. Convictions that had been elaborated in hours of deep reflection poured out of him with such rapidity and lucidity that even Morris was surprised. The prior did not argue his case. He simply presented convictions that had been won through hard and consistent reasoning. He was giving vent to the accumulated thought of years. He presented his ideal and his reasons for striving for its fulfillment with a forcefulness that shook the stubborn Morris. He climaxed his confession with, "And yet the community quietly laughs at me, the abbot humors and patronizes me, while even you and the rest of my friends think I'm deluded. Can it be that I'm the only one who is wrong?" Morris was dumbfounded. Of late years he had secretly envied Robert the air of solid assurance that seemed to mark his every step. He thought him devoid of doubt, free from all harassing questions, and living a life that was utterly simplified because his goal was clear and the way to it as open as the skies. He honestly believed that Robert was walking a highway as broad as a Roman road and as bright as a cloudless noonday heaven. To hear him now claim that he was groping in a fog disconcerted Morris. He did not know what to say. Robert turned from him and walked to the window. Yes, he murmured, this life seems terrifyingly empty at times. Did Christ's seem any fuller? The question came hesitatingly. Morris knew that it was the only answer, but he was not sure that Robert should be faced with the only answer at the moment. You need a rest, he added quickly. I need a chance, retorted Robert, then checked himself. Slowly a smile softened the hard lines of his face. Turning to his friend, he chuckled very self-consciously and said, Didn't I tell you I was walking in a haze? Here I am seeking a chance to do something for Christ while I am actually stumbling over an opportunity to suffer for him. Thanks for clearing the atmosphere, Morris. But between ourselves, I must admit that I'd love to try that primitive observance. Forget it, was Morris's only reply. And for years, Robert did seem to forget it. But on the day Theodoric was buried, Morris learned that Robert had not forgotten. He found the prior that afternoon seated at his desk, staring fixedly at the crucifix he held in his hands. Morris entered quietly. Thinking of death? He asked softly. Of life, Morris, of life, came the unexpected, firm reply from the man who had not lifted his eyes. It is not death that matters, it is what goes before death. Then turning to his friend, he said, Think of it! My father's eternity was settled by what he did in time. Actions that we call passing deeds, that we say are things of the moment, have an everlastingness to them. Our lives are lived under the white glare of eternity. If we only had the eyes to see it, Morris, our days are flung against a background of finality that frightens one. Did you hear my father's last words? No. There is only one mistake in life, not to be a saint. What? Yes, Morris. Those were the dying words of my father, and he never uttered a truer syllable all his days. That's why people are born, Morris. That's why you and I are here at St. Pierre de la Salle. Not to make life's only mistake. The prior laid the crucifix on his desk. My mother is lonely today, Morris, but she is happy in her loneliness. She wept as she spoke to me, but the light that shimmered in the midst of those tears told me of the glow of happiness in her heart. She looked at me and said, Your father did not make life's only mistake. I believe her. I believe that I could have answered, and neither is my mother making it. But Morris, I'm wondering about their son. About their son? Yes. Am I making life's only mistake? Of course not, came the indignant reply. I wish I were so sure as that, said Robert as he slowly turned and looked into a twilight sky. God has given us such opportunities, Morris. And you have made the most of them. You have ever walked the narrow way. Ah, but there is a nobler way, and you know it. Nobler? Yes, there it is in symbol, said the prior, and pointed to the evening star. Morris looked up, then musingly asked, Oh, you mean the rule to the letter? Exactly, said Robert, the rule to the letter. What wouldn't I give to try it? Then, sighing deeply, he added, "But it seems as though my dream must die with me. I shall never have a chance." "Who knows?" said Morris. "Who knows?" He meant the remark merely as comfort for his friend, for he did not sympathize with the ideal, though he did with the holder of that ideal. But Morris had good reason to recall that last remark a few years later, when the abbot summoned him and said, "You lose a friend tomorrow, and I lose the staff of my old age." When Morris asked what this meant, old Bernard replied, "Father Prior has been elected abbot of St. Michael of Tonnerre. We shall both miss him much, but—" "Dominus est," finished Morris, not too enthusiastically. "I suppose it is selfish of me not to rejoice, but this is all a bit sudden, Reverend Father. What do you know of Tonnerre? Will Robert like it?" "I don't know," answered the abbot a trifle dubiously. Hunault, its last abbot, dubbed the community cold. He said they were posers, always talking about crosses, but thinking little of the crucified. He said that the shadow of a real cross would break most of their backs. But Hunault had that kind of a tongue. He said the same thing was true of many religious. But what I am wondering is whether Robert will attempt his reform. The time seems ripe. Morris looked at his abbot quizzically, then asked a question that had bothered him for years. "Why didn't you allow him to do it here?" he asked. "Do I have to answer that?" asked the abbot as he lifted his eyes to Morris's face. "You know the temper of my monks and the tempo of this monastery. I've sympathized with Robert for decades, but—" "But you didn't think it practical," urged Morris. "Now tell me, Reverend Father, do you think it possible anywhere?" "All things are possible to God, my son." "Which is not an answer to my question." The abbot turned slowly, rested his weight on his left forearm, and faced Morris fully. "Father Morris, I don't know whether it can be done or not, but I do know this. If any man can do it, Robert is the man. I am an old monk. I am a very old man. I have seen many monks and many men in my almost 80 years of life, but I have never yet seen a man or a monk with as much tenacity as Father Robert." "Oh, I admit that," Morris said with impatience. "But the question that has always baffled me is whether he is holding on to the right thing or not. Father Abbot, why is it that I have not been convinced? I see everything else with him eye to eye, but I cannot see this ideal of his." "Have you tried?" "With all my might. When his father was won over, I made a supreme effort. But as usual, I came back to my old illustration. The oak is not the acorn. No, it is the living, growing, ever-spreading tree. So too with Benedictinism today. It is the logical, living development of the seed that Benedict buried in the furrow at Subiaco and Monte Cassino. We should no more go back to that than the oak should go back to the acorn from which it sprang. Our Lord said, 'Unless the grain of wheat die.'" The abbot's head shook in slow negation. "Father," he said kindly, "that is a perfect example of an utterly unanswerable, speculative argument. But now look at the practical. Listen to me. I have seen over half a century of attempted reforms, Father. They did not take. They are still attempting them. Every new pope calls a council. They gather. They face the facts. They draw up decrees. Read those decrees, Father. Read them for the last 60 or 70 years. They are all the same. Simony and incontinency and simony, but the traffic still goes on. Bishoprics are bought and sold, and the clergy is not clean. But the monks. Father, you have lived all your life here at St. Pierre's. Thank God we have had a very regular community. But there are not many St. Pierre's on the continent. Cluny was a reform. It affected marbles, but today, Cluny. And the old man stopped. What about Cluny? Prompted Father Morris. Never mind, said the abbot quietly, but know this, that the monastic world needs something drastic, something radical, something that will shake and shatter its complacency. Robert has an idea. Maybe it's the thing. He has made me ashamed of my too ready acceptance of things as they were. We don't live the rule to the letter, Morris. Of course we don't. The letter kills. Yes, said the abbot quietly as he sat back in his chair. The letter kills. It kills the slothful, grudging, ungenerous old man who lives deep in all of us. Robert believed in killing that old man, Father Morris. He has succeeded in his own case, I'm quite sure. I think he may be able to succeed in the case of others. He will have his chance at Tonnerre. For a moment, the two men sat in silence. Then the abbot looked up, squinted at Morris quizzically, and said, You too are to have your chance, my son. What chance? Asked Morris. I wish to inform you that I need a prior, and that you are the man I need. I? It was a shout of incredulity. The abbot chuckled. Yes, you. But my sharp tongue, it can be curbed. 30 years of vigorous effort haven't done it. Keep on trying, smiled the abbot. Go now and see Father Robert. He will have some matters to explain to you. Father Morris left the abbot's room in dismay. He passed several monks in the cloister without so much as a nod. He had not seen them. He found Robert seated at his desk with his hands idle. The two men looked at one another. Then Robert smiled. Hello, Father Prior. Won't you come in and sit down? So you know? Yes, I know. And now you know. Yours is a responsible position, Morris. Dom Bernard is old. You will have to be abbot in everything but name. Never mind me, think of yourself, said Morris as he rapidly crossed the room and drew a chair close to the prior's desk. Tell me, are you going to attempt the reform? Robert sobered. His eyes were fixed on the crucifix before him. After what seemed a very long time, he asked, Do you think conscience would allow of anything else? Oh, bother conscience, snapped Morris with an impatient flick of the hand. What does common sense say? Robert drummed on the desk a moment. Then turning to his friend, he said, Is it that you simply refuse to understand, Morris? For over 30 years you have known what has burned in my soul. Now is my chance. I will have my own monastery, my own men. What can I do but try to make them burn as I have burned and am still burning? Would I be loyal to Christ? Would I be true to myself if I did anything else? I have told you of the host in my heart. Yes, I know, interrupted Morris, but you have conformed for 30 years. It has sanctified you. Why now attempt a reform that is liable to upset the whole tenor of your life, to say nothing of the lives of those around you? It's too great a gamble, Robert. Don't do it. Robert lifted the crucifix in his hands, looked at his friend, and asked, Hasn't it ever struck you, Morris, that the soldiers were not the only gamblers on Golgotha? They shook dice beneath the cross. They gambled for the robe of the God-man. But the greatest gambler hung on the cross. Jesus flung his life away, had his heart pierced, on the long chance that he might win the hearts of men. Don't say that he has lost. Silence again held the two friends. As he laid the crucifix back on the desk, Robert said, There is a gap to be filled, Morris. I am convinced that God's wrath must be greatly kindled against the people. Look at the papacy. The chair of Peter has been the pawn of politicians ever since you and I came here. First it was the Count of Tusculum, who shifted it to whomsoever he would. Now it is the Emperor of Germany. That should not be. That gives us anti-popes. That sets the people wandering like lost sheep. I know, but look at the cloisters. Think of the saints at Cluny and among the Camaldolese. Yes, think of them. In your new office, Morris, you will come in closer contact with the men of this monastery and the men of other monasteries. You'll soon see that there is a gap. I'm going to try to fill it. When Morris made no further comment, Robert said, I wish you were coming with me. I'm going to need a staunch friend, and that you certainly have been. And still am, asserted Morris vigorously. Then since you can't come physically, accompany me with your prayers. I'm not closing my eyes to what lies ahead, Morris. It is not going to be easy. But my hopes are high, for it is God's work after all. He'll have to see it through. Pray that I don't make life's only mistake.